Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we are working on a holiday-themed CNC project where we try to tackle this slightly oversized Light-Up Picture Frame Ornament. I'll be using basic CNC toolpaths like pockets and contours to cut out all of the components for this totally unique project, and for those of you looking for a little bit more of a challenge, I'll also add in some optional engraving toolpaths using a diamond drag bit. And as always, if you do decide you want to try to make a few of these yourself and don't feel like designing it from the ground up, I will post the full CNC build files down below in the video description. Now let's go cut some wood. Starting off with some simple cuts on the table saw to make sure that our stock is ready to throw on the CNC, I think it's important to show you just how basic all of the components are for this project, seeing as they're just a bunch of rectangles. The only thing of note that I will say is when you're cutting the acrylic panel, make sure to put enough pressure next to the blade so that the acrylic doesn't kick up and, well, potentially hit you in the face. It's unlikely, but shit happens. Anyway, what you should be left with are 3 different size rectangles made from different materials, the first being component number 1, which is 3/4 inch stock, cut to 12 inches by 8 inches, and that will make up the main body of our ornaments. And obviously, if you haven't realized it by now, we are making 2 at once. Component number 2 will make up the top covers, and you may notice 5 holes in each one for screws, and that's because if you ever need to change the battery in the light, well, it's easy to do so. And as for the acrylic of component number 3, you may be wondering why there's 3 pieces involved, and all I have to say to that is stick around till later in the video and I'll show you. Other than that, what you see on the screen right now is the hardware required for this project, including the tea lights I used, ornament string, number 4 screws to secure the covers, and of course we need some fake sparkly snow to really pull everything together. But enough with the boring stuff, let's move over to the CNC machine and actually start carving things because, let's be honest, that's probably why you're watching this video in the first place. As always, step number 1 is properly securing your workpiece to the wasteboard, and in my case, I'll be using a combination of double-sided tape and clamps. If you don't feel like using the double-sided tape, you could get away with it by just adding tabs, but that does add more sanding later on, which I don't really feel like dealing with. So here we are. And of course, before we can press go, don't forget to set your Z0 height using whatever method your machine is equipped to handle. But then, go ahead and press go. Now obviously I did do a lot of work within my CAD program to assign toolpaths before pressing that button, but don't be intimidated, there's nothing complicated about these components. In fact, if I open up Carbide Create Pro, which is my program of choice, you can see the SVG files for yourself. One of the first things that I like to do while working on projects like this is group the similar vectors together because I know that those will have the exact same toolpaths assigned to them. Once that's done, I can go ahead and select those vectors and start assigning toolpaths, which in this component's case means pockets, contours, drilling toolpaths, and something called rest machining pockets. Now that last one does sound kind of complicated, but I promise that it's not. All it means is that it's taking a smaller diameter end mill and pocketing out the areas that the larger bit before it couldn't reach. Once finished, I did realize I made my first mistake, which is not an uncommon one for me, being the fact that my stock was slightly thicker than the 3/4 inch that I had programmed it for. That means that my components did not break completely free of the stock, which is not a huge deal for me since I do have a drum sander, which allows me to slowly plane off material until, well, they do break free. Easy peasy. With that fix, it's just a matter of doing some simple sanding before adding some spray lacquer and letting these dry before moving on to component number 2. And yes, I did in fact quickly check to make sure that our tea lights actually fit in the places they are supposed to. No problem there. Anyway, moving on, the only thing different about pre-machining for component number 2 is the fact that I want to V-carve the date into the bottom of the front panel here, so I am going to use Aura Mask to cover that up first. And because I didn't want to be wasteful, I ended up using component number 1 to sort of figure out where that Aura Mask should be placed so I could cut it into smaller pieces and not have to cover the entire stock. I know, sometimes I'm pretty smart. When it comes to work holding, everything will remain the same using the double-sided tape and clamps, and other than this initial V-carve toolpath for the text, we're going to go back to using inside and outside contour toolpaths to cut out our components. And yes, once again, I needed to use the drum sander to break these free of the stock. It's a bad habit I have. No harm, no foul though, and we can move on to painting these with some red acrylic paint before letting them dry, removing the ore mask, sanding them clean, and then, yes, finishing them with more spray lacquer. We're getting there, I promise. At least now you can see how the cover is going to join with the main component and hold the light in place, but obviously we are missing our clear acrylic cover, which is our final component and probably the most complicated if you choose to do some engraving. Which you totally should, because it's super fun and opens up a ton of possibilities with your CNC machine, so let me show you how I did it. And yes, I did make some mistakes. So what I'm doing here is marking out where my component will be glued in place using the painter's tape and CA glue method on top of my secondary MDF wasteboard that doesn't have any T-track running through it. The reason I want this completely flat surface is because while you're engraving, the bit is going to be pushing down on the plastic and you don't want it getting pushed down into that T-track. The CA glue and activator work holding method is a great choice, especially because acrylic sheets have plastic covers on both sides of them, so even if you make a mess, it shouldn't be too big of a deal. Just make sure that before you start carving anything, you do remove that top layer. That is super important, and ask me how I know. The engraving toolpath itself really isn't much different than a pocket in terms of how it clears out an area, but instead of cutting into the material using a spinning end mill, we're going to be using this spring-loaded drag bit with no RPMs on the spindle. It will be completely off and just scratching the surface. Now this is real-time speed as I start to engrave my snowflake, but also where I realized I made a mistake. I didn't film it, but in order to set my Z height, I ended up using my bit setter, which in combination with a bit that is spring-loaded and moves, made my Z0 way too low. As a result, as the bit tried to retract to move on to the next section, it didn't actually clear the surface, which left behind these drag marks. Luckily, I caught that before it became too noticeable, and it is an easy fix because instead of using the high-tech bit setter, I'm just going to set my Z0 height using the old-school paper method. Now showing you the sped up engraving process on the exact same workpiece, you can see the difference in the engraving because it's not pushing down so hard, but honestly that's how it's supposed to look and, well, it looks better. The rest of the snowflakes came out great as well. My only complaint would be that this toolpath did take a long time, but I suppose I could just increase my feed rate. Lessons learned. Alright, with the hard part out of the way, the final toolpath for this project is an outside contour using an O-flute bit to cut through the acrylic, and with that finished, all we need to do is remove them from the machine, clean them up a bit after removing the plastic and using some Windex, and well, here's the result. I think they look pretty good. With all of our components off the machine, we can finally put our parts together just to make sure they fit as they should, but clearly we're still missing the photograph, which is where that third piece from component number 3 comes into play. So let me show you how to use it. You probably noticed that it is smaller than the other two, and you guessed it, it fits directly into component number 1, which allows us to use it as a template. So all that means is we need to lay it over our photograph of choice, use an X-Acto blade to cut it out, and voila, we have a perfect fit. From there we can glue it in place before adding our fake snow and light bulb, and top it off with the acrylic cover. One thing to note here is that you want to put the scratchy side facing down, because when people touch it, well, I guess you want it to be smooth. Next we'll add the ornament string before finally finishing this project completely by screwing down the top cover. And well, here's the big reveal. That's all I got for you, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.